So upon opening your 3D segments project, this is what you should be seeing. And here we have all of our segments under the segments folder. And let's just get started with the first one, which is coming up. So if I drop down the menu here and go to my render, this is the composition that you will be using to render. So double click this. And just for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to set this to third resolution. All right, and you can see we have 3 layers for our settings here. And let's go to our first one, and I'm just going to use the effects control here, and let's go over some of the settings here. All right, so right away you can see that you can either have the schedule version, which you can choose between 3 clips that you can cycle through, so something like a menu, or you can turn this off. And you can see that you have just a standard coming up, so just the text here and your footage on top. All right, let's go to our background color, and you can see that we can change the background here. It's not really noticeable, but you can also change that, so that's something to keep in mind. And then for the geometry, we can change the angle here to give it another color. And you can see as I'm cycling through the angle here that you can easily adjust the color like this. Right, let's set this back to 0. And you can also, so for example, let's use a value of 155. And you can also affect the desaturation from here. So geometry tint will be the saturation, or rather desaturation. So for example, if I set this to 50, it's going to be more gray and towards black and white. And 100 will just give me a full-on black and white color, so just the gray scale values. All right, let's set this back to 0, and let's set this also back to 0. You can also affect the highlights, of course, and let's use another color here, and you can kind of see what that affects. Let's set this to blue, and let's set the light rays maybe to green. You can see that you have individual control over certain elements, and this varies from segment to segment. You can also affect the screen tint. You can kind of slightly see it here. All right, and you can also affect the screen highlight. Let's choose another angle here. And you can kind of see it here at the bottom of the screen, so undo that, and you can see this is with the green color. Alright, so you can change all the colors as however you want. Let's go back to our schedule version, so I will check this checkbox, and let's go to our clip transitions. Alright, and here if I select this clip transition layer and press U, this will give me my keyframes, and you can see that we have a few keyframes here. So for clip 2, this will be the first transition. So for example, let's say that I have my first clip here, and I want it to change to the second hour and the second clip, and I want the first clip to last a little longer. I can go ahead and select these keyframes and drag them over, and now wherever this clip 2 value goes from 0 to 100, the transition will happen, as you can see here. Alright, so as I scroll through my timeline, wherever the keyframes are, then the transition will be. So the same goes for our third hour and our third clip. So for example, right now you can see that from second 6 to around second 7, the transition happens, as you can see. And let's say I want to make this longer or shorter. You can just offset the keyframes. And you can see now that actually our composition went away, and this is because our out transition needs to be adjusted. So I can select the transition out and press U for my keyframe information, and I can also adjust when the out transition happens. So if I select these keyframes and move them over in my timeline, now our third transition happens from around second 9 towards 10, and then it lasts for about a few seconds, and then from the second 13 to around 15 we have our arrow that comes in and swipes our composition away. And you don't have to use the transition out. You can simply delete these keyframes and make sure that the transition animation is set to 0 here, and then it will just simply last up to around 25 seconds. All right. So as you can see, pretty flexible, and you can adjust the durations and transitions however you want. Let's go and set this back to regular standard version. Right, so that's coming up. Let's go to our double bumper. Oh, and also let's check out our holders here. So in our holders, we have the schedule holders, and we have our media. And here, if you use the schedule version, you can replace the media here. So 1, 2, and 3, and the same for text. You can adjust all of the text and the hours, for example, and the titles by accessing these holders, right? And that's for schedule. And if you use just the simple version, you can adjust the media. So you only have one media to deal with, and then simply the text. We have our first text and then our second text. All right, so you can very easily and freely change all of the text and all of the media. All right, so moving on to our double bumper render here. Let's double click this. And this is our double bumper. Now you can see we have our transition layer, and I forgot to mention in our coming up render that you can also affect the colors of the arrow. So pretty much the same controls as the main settings. You can affect the geometry and the tint. So geometry tint is just simply desaturation. Set this back, and you can also affect the highlight. Let's use a blue. As you can see here, it changes, and you can also flip the direction if you want. Alright, so all of the layers, I mean not all of the layers, but some of the compositions have this transition out layers, and they all pretty much operate the same. Alright, and don't forget, if you don't want to use this arrow, you can simply turn off the animation and set the slider to 0. Alright, now let's go to our colors here and check this out. We have pretty much the same colors, so we can affect the geometry tint. Let's see highlights. Alright, let's see light rays, individual control here, and our screen pixels. Let's choose another frame here. So our screen pixels will be sort of like the reveal on the screens here. You can kind of see how this changes. Alright, and just a couple additional settings here. If you want, you can also use an additional logo holder here at the top. So you can turn this on or off, sorry. And additional text holders at the top here. So you can also turn these on or off. So for example, you can have it simple like this, or you can add a logo and the text, or just the text, or just the logo. And yeah, that's pretty much it for our double bumper. And of course, the holders are the same. You replace the media with the holders, and everything is pretty much self-explanatory here. Let's go to our logo transition. Let's step inside this composition, and we only have a colors layer here, so you can affect, let's check this out, you can affect the background, you can affect the second color of the background, as you can see here. Let's see, the same colors, the same controls for geometry and geometry tint. We have our highlights. Alright, we have our logo screen. You can kind of see here. And we also have our pixels. So pixels is usually just sort of like an extra element that you can think of. And then we have our holders. Just have a simple holder for the logo. And that's it for logo transition. Let's go over to player stats. Let's jump inside the player stats render here, and let's set this to third so it works faster. Just give it a second. Alright, and here we have it. We have our transition out, so this will be the swiping arrow, which you can adjust where it comes and the colors and everything. And then we have the simple colors. We have our background 1. Background 2 will be the red in the background here. So this color over here, and then the simple again the geometry and geometry tint, and we have a highlight. Alright, and a player highlight, so you can choose a different color for your player, as you can see. And let's just jump a bit in the holders here. So for our holders, we have a simple media holder and two text holders. The text holders are pretty much self-explanatory. So we have the information here, which you can very easily change to whatever text you want, or the player stats name. So pretty much here you can use just any text. You can even delete this text and use another new layer. Just one thing I want to mention for our player holder is that your player must have alpha transparency. So it shouldn't come with a black background. And in case your player has a black background, you can go ahead and grab the pen tool and just simply draw a mask around it, like so. Alright? And you can go ahead and complete the mask. And this will just ensure that, and this is sort of cutting out the background, the black background from your player. So that's just something to keep in mind, that you do need alpha transparency for your for the player that you want to use, right? Let's go back to our segments here, and let's go inside the single bumper, which is the next one. So double click this. All right, and here we have our transition out. And again, just pretty much the same settings here. Let's go over the highlights a bit and see what changes. Right, so I can have the highlights changed, individual control over the light rays, and individual control over our screen pixels. Alright, let's go to our next one. Let's go to text interstitial and double click this. So as far as colors go, you can see we have the transition arrow layer, and we have our settings layer. So as far as colors go, pretty much the same as the other ones. Let's go over the colors a bit. So you can change the highlights, you can change the lights, individual control over our screen pixels, and you see we have a two options here for back screen and tagline. So for example, I can turn off the back screen and I can turn off the tagline here, and this is the standard version. So you can either add the tagline or you can also add the tagline and the black screen, sort of similar to our double bumper. All right, and the holders are pretty much just the standard holders. You can, if you choose to use the back screen here, then you will need to replace the holder inside the media folder. All right, let's go to our top 10 here. Let's go to our render. This is our top 10, and you can see there's no transition arrow, simply because I didn't think it would be necessary for this composition to last longer than it already is, so around 4 seconds. We have the same options here for our colors, alright, and also you can affect the colors for our logo or number, as you can see. And let's see, if you go inside the holders here, we only have a media one, and if I double click this, here you can use whatever layer you want. Just make sure you have alpha transparency, so you can use, I have 2 layers prepared over here. So for example, this is just for the number 5, and let's see, this is how it looks in the render. Alright, so you can use any text, any font. Let's choose another font here. Let's go with Bang Gothic and center this. Just make sure it's centered, and you can go to your title, action save, and just make sure that your numbers or whatever layers you're using are centered. Go back in our top 10 render, and you can see it here updating. And you can also use a logo. So whatever has transparency, you can use a logo or a player. And if I go back in our render, you can see how this looks. Alright, so that's just something to keep in mind, that you can you're not limited to numbers. You can use any text with alpha transparency. And the last one here is our transition interstitial, and I will click this. Alright, so this one is actually a bit trickier. Alright, so the standard duration is somewhere around, I don't know, like 5 seconds, I think. Let's just use a third quarter resolution. So you can see it lasts like 4 seconds. And let's check out our settings layer real fast. You can have your geometry and geometry tint options and the screen one. So pretty much the standard color options that you had so far. Only you have a version that you can check for media. So if you want to use a video for your transition, you will need to check this option. Or if you simply want to use text, you can uncheck this option, and you can see it turns back to text. Alright, so now to adjust the duration, this is a little more complicated than the rest, but it's still pretty easy. Make sure you are in the transition interstitial composition, so click anywhere here in the comp, and then just simply select all of the layers and press U. Alright, and here you can see that these are all the keyframes that control the transition. Alright, so up until this point, up until the first second, these keyframes on this side are responsible for the in transition, and these keyframes on the other side are responsible for the out transition. All right, so let's say if you want to make this last a little longer, you can select all these keyframes from the second half. All right, and let's say that you want the transition to last, I don't know, for 10 seconds. All right, you can just simply grab all these keyframes and then just push them towards the 10-second mark. All right, and now you have a regular 10 seconds duration transition. And here you can see that the transition happens where all these keyframes are. So just a little bit complicated, but this was the only way I could set this up. So hopefully you won't have much trouble with it, but you can always just contact me if you're having trouble, and I'm sure we can figure something out together. That's pretty much how you can change and edit all of these individual segments. And I just want to mention this real fast, that because all of the segments have alpha transparency when they transition, so I can enable this here. Just make sure that when you create your render, so when you go to composition, pre-render, just make sure that in your costume AV, whatever format you're using, I recommend using AV anyway. So just make sure that your channels are set to RGB plus alpha. So this will enable the transparency part to also render, and then you can simply overlay your renders on top of your original footage and just get that seamless transition. Right, so that's just something to keep in mind. Then you can hit OK, hit render, and you're done. So thanks for watching so far. See you in the next video. Upon opening the backgrounds project file, this is what you should be seeing. So let's start right away with the background render. So under your 2-point background folder, you will have the background render. And if you double click this, this is the composition that pops up. And here we have 2 layers that control the look. And the first one is the sport option. And here you can see that the default one is the logo. And if you want to use a logo, you will have to go inside the first replace logo folder, and here you will have the logo holder composition. Double click this, and right here you can import and drop your logo inside this composition. And for example, I have another logo here, and you can see how this will update in the background render if you use the logo option. Alright, let's just use another frame here. So here you have it. All right, let's go back to our sports controls here, and you can see we have you can very easily select whichever sports you want to render. So you can see that through just a simple click you can change to whatever sports you want to use. And let's say for example that I want to use motorsports. You can check motorsports, and then you can go to your colors, and here you can affect all of the colors. So for example, background color 1, if I change this, you can see how this changes here in the viewport. And let's see color 2, let's use a blue here. Let's go for our elements 1. You can see you have really a lot of control over the look of your project. So let's see, elements 2, we also can control these. So you can see just through a few clicks the background looks completely different. You can also turn off the color correction. So the color correction is pretty much just some contrast that accentuate the highlights. So if you want to focus more on the sports element, so this element right here, you can choose to desaturate the color a bit by disabling color correction. All right. You can also control the background desaturation. So for example, if I set this to 50, you can see it's more black and white, and the element for the sports pop up a little bit more. Sports color amount, let's see, if I use a value of 50, you can see that it turns towards the color that you choose for sport color 1. So for example, if I set this to a green, and let's say that this is a bit too green for me, I can also just affect the desaturation here by increasing the value. So for example, a value of 90 will give me more a black and white result. Sport color 2 will be the particles that fly around your element, and sports color 3 will be just a highlight. Alright, and you can see how this changes here. And after you've done editing everything here, you can see that this is a 1-minute loop. Alright, but if you double click this bg loop underscore comp, you can double click this and you can see where the loop starts and ends, and you can if you want to save time and you have a program, your software, your editing software can handle loops somehow, you can only just select the part that is loopable. Alright, so you can just select and trim the composition to this part, and then you can go to composition, pre-render, and then choose your settings and make the render like that. Alright, so that's for our background. Let's see, we have a schedule render here. So if I double click the schedule render, this is what you should be getting. And you can see that the schedule render is using the background render. So whatever colors you use for your background here, it will affect the schedule render as well. So if for example, let's just change the color here real fast. So you can see that now if I go back in our schedule render, it also works here. So you can see how the changes affected. We have a settings layer we have an adjustment layer for the schedule render here, which has a transition 1 and transition 2. And with these settings, you can control pretty much the schedule here. So for example, let's say that the first row of titles comes in at the beginning of our timeline, and let's say it ends at around, right now it ends at the 3-second mark, and it ends towards the 5-second mark. Alright, so let's just say maybe I want this to last a little longer. I can grab all these keyframes and just space them out, and you can see the transition 2 slider. This will control the second row of titles that show up. So you can see as I adjust these keyframes, you can see how this affects it in the timeline. All right, and I can also make this last longer. So it's very easy to control the transitions for the titles. You don't even have to use a second wave of titles, for example. So if I grab the keyframes for my transition 2 and delete and set this to 0, you can see now that we only have the first 3 titles that come in, and then just simply fade out. Alright, let's go back in our project, and here you have all the folders which you can, all the holders that you can edit, so all the times and the titles and whatnot. So all you have to do is just simply double click any of these comps, double click the layer, the text layer that's there, and just replace your text. So other text here, for example, go back in our schedule render, you can see other text here, and you can simply change the time like that as well. So 7:45, let's go with 10:45, and go back in our schedule render, 10:45. Alright, so that's pretty much it. I also have an extra folder here, so 4 elements will be all the elements that are looping, so all the loopable elements. And for example, if I import if I import my image file, so let's just import an image real fast. So for example, here I have imported an image file and I'll drop it inside a new composition. And let's just say that I want to place my loopable element on this composition. I can just grab both of these compositions and I will just drag them and drop them inside the composition, and just be sure that the particles composition, so all of these folders are made up of two compositions, which is one is the geometry and the second one is particles. So always make sure that the particles one is on top of the geometry one and you set it to add. Alright, and this will ensure that it properly blends in with the source footage. Alright, and now I can simply grab these layers, press S for scale, and I can scale them down or up. And if you want to change the color, you can go inside any of these compositions. So for example, I can double click baseball geometry, and here I have a colors layer. And if I go to effect control, you can see I can control the base color like so. I can control the highlights as well, and I can also increase or decrease the saturation. Alright, and let's go back here for a second and also change the color, very easily change the colors for the particles. So double click the particles composition, and inside you will have a color layer. You can simply change this to whatever you want, and now when you go back you can see it updated here. And pretty much all these elements follow the same structure. So basketball geometry and particles, they have the same color layers, and you can just simply drag them and drop them in on your timeline on top of your footage, and it can work like that. Alright, so that's how you can use the elements, and that's pretty much it for the background project. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. So upon opening your lower thirds project file, this is what you should be seeing, and here are all of the lower third compositions that we'll be editing. So let's go and let's start with the very first one, which will be LT additional, and LT stands for lower thirds, and it's just a short abbreviation. And if you drop down the menu here, you can see we have a holders folder and a render folder. So inside the render folder, if you double click this, it will pop up the composition, and this will be our lower thirds, and you can see it's already animating. And let's check this out and see that we have a layer called settings. And just note that all of the lower thirds have this layer, so they all have a settings layer, as you can see. So back in my LT additional lower third, if I drop down the settings here, or actually let's just go to effects control at the top here, just so it's easier to navigate. And we can see the first option here is a transition, and this is an animatable parameter. And what this means is if I select this settings layer and press U, this will show up all my keyframes. And you can see there are already 4 keyframes here, which dictate when this lower third starts. So right here at the beginning, and then at the end it fades out. And these keyframes control the duration and the animation. So by adjusting these keyframes, let's say I want the beginning to be a little shorter, I can just drag this keyframe here, and you can see this automatically adjusts based on the keyframes. Alright, and I can also, for example, this is lasting for 6 seconds. Roughly 6 seconds, as you can see. Let's say I want to make it last for 10 seconds. I can just grab these keyframes and then simply drag them over to the 10 seconds mark, like so, and you can pretty much adjust the duration and animation like so. I can also make this appear slower if I want to, and this is up for you to experiment. Alright, let's just place this back. And then for my other settings here, we have a color 1 and color 2. Color 1 will be the base color of this lower third. So you can see as I change this, you can see the tint slightly changes for the base. And the second color will be the highlights. So if I change this, you can kind of see how this looks. And this second color also affects the beginning transition element. You can see these sparks here, or whatever you want to call them. So this color, the second color, also controls this portion of the animation. So pretty much all the other lower thirds follow these the same sort of a setup. Let's just set this back to set the second color back to red. So all of these lower thirds follow pretty much the same settings. The settings will vary just a bit for each one, and I'll just go over each one just to make sure that I clear up everything. All right, and also then the next part will be changing the actual text inside the lower thirds and media files. So if you go inside your holders folder, here you can see you have all the compositions where you can double click and then change your text. For example, change my logo, or just rescale this, or just scale this bigger, just so it shows that it updates in the main composition, as you can see here. So you can go ahead and import and change your logo. Then for the subtext, you can go ahead and change the text here. Let's use a different text here, and it's very important that well, I really recommend you edit the text by double clicking the layer that's already there. So I don't recommend deleting the layer and then making a new text layer. Just simply double click and edit the text like so. And by the way, this font is called Accents, and it's available on the font. Alright, let's go back and see it updates here. And for my title, I can also change this, double click, and let's and then if I go back, you can see it updating here. So I will undo these changes. Alright, let's go in our LT short, and LT short is pretty much exactly the same. You have the exact same controls, only just less holders to edit. You only have one title holder. And let's see, LT simple is pretty much the same thing as the short one, just that it also has a logo holder. So this is what I'm talking about. But everything else is exactly the same. Let's go over to player comparison, and let's open up the render here. Alright, and you can see we have the transition properties, and you can see, for example, if you only have 2 keyframes, you can go ahead and add a new keyframe for 100, and you can fade it out by placing the, let's see, the second keyframe here. If I set this to 0, then you simply create the out animation, and you can see how easily adjustable this is, right? And now I can move the keyframes to wherever I want, or if I don't want a out animation, I can simply delete them. And you can do this with all the lower third compositions if you don't want a transition out, or even if you don't want a transition in. But at this point, it's better off to just save it as a static image and use that. Alright, let's see, we have our colors here, so pretty much the same thing. The first color affects the base, and the second color affects the highlights. And let's check this out. Let's go to our holders. And this, you can see there's a lot of holders over here. This lower third, the player comparison one, is probably has the most holders to edit. So you can see we can edit the middle portion. Let's check this out, player comparison. So you can see we can change this middle segment. I mean, everything here, all the text you see, you can change, and the logos and everything. So you can go ahead and go through each of these holders and edit them individually. Alright, and player single is pretty much the same thing as the player comparison one. You only have less holders to deal with, as you can see. Then we have our score, and let's check out our score here. And for the settings here, you see you have 2 transitions. So this is slightly different from, you can select the layer settings and press U, and this will show up the keyframe information. And you can see this is a little different because it has a second transition here. And the second transition here, if I grab the keyframes that are for the second transition and move them around, you can see that these keyframes pretty much control this slate here with the timer. Alright, so you can also control that if you want, or if you don't want to use the timer thing, you can just simply select these keyframes, delete, and then set this slider for transition 2 to 0, and then you can see you can choose whether to have the timer or not. Let's undo that. Alright, you can also adjust the duration, and then if you want to fade this out, you can make another keyframe, set this to 0, and do the same for our original top layer. So let's move on to our last one, which is the versus one. And the versus one is just this is very standard to the rest, so all the same settings. And let's see, we have a few holders over here for you to edit, but that's pretty much it for the lower thirds, and that's how you use them. After you set up any of these lower thirds, you can go ahead and trim your composition to the duration of your choosing, and then go to composition, let's go to pre-render, and then in custom AV here, make sure that whatever format you're using, in the video output settings, your channels are RGB plus alpha, and this will enable the transparency, so you can overlay them on your main footage. Alright, and then hit OK, hit render. And just another thing that I want to share real fast here, I made a test composition, which is just a static image, and I just want to show you that you can also use your lower thirds. You can grab them from the render. So let's say for example for LT additional, I'm gonna grab this lower thirds additional from the render folder, and I'll just drag this in my composition. And if I scroll my timeline a bit, you can see that it overlays with the footage. Alright, so you can also use them like this. You can drag them in your timeline. So that's just a bit of extra information that I wanted to share. Alright, see you in the next video.